What's up, you beautiful people? Welcome to another video. So today I want to tell you about one of the most brilliant founders I have ever known. He was pretty incredible, genuinely one of the sharpest operators I've ever been around. I think by the time he was 35, he had already built and exited a mid 8-figure business. He owned tens of millions of dollars of real estate and had one of those lives that a lot of founders like to take pictures of and post on Instagram just to kind of make you feel jealous, right? And then just out of nowhere, he stopped. And it was maybe a couple years after he had exited his business that I caught up with him at a coffee shop and, just chatting. As I asked him, like, what are you up to these days? And I remember this very clearly because he looked at me with like these really sad eyes and he said, honestly, nothing in particular. Nothing in particular. I mean, that sentence, it hit me like a cold bucket of water because from the outside looking in, the guy had it all. Like he was sitting there, like he was the founder's founder. He was the guy, and he just looked so lost. And I remember thinking, like, this guy's hit a plateau, and he doesn't even realize it. Like he's stuck because like on the climb up the mountain, he reached this level, and then instead of just like pushing on, he just set up his base camp and he just stayed and he never left. And the thing about comfort zones like that is that they don't really feel like failures at the time. They feel like the obvious thing, like you rewarding yourself. This is what I was working for. Finally, I get to take a breath of fresh air, right? And the smarter you are, the easier it is to like convince yourself that that's true. And what ends up happening is you get to this point where you realize you're not moving forward anymore. You're not moving forward in life. You're living on this plateau. You've hit the ceiling. Your comfort zone has expanded beyond your ambition. And you look up and your life is just like gray and dull and you can't quite figure it out. And so in this video, I want to share with you just 4 of the traps that we as founders can fall into at all different levels of the game that pull us, that suck us into these plateaus that stall our growth, stall our evolution, stall our pursuit of purpose and meaning. And at the end, I'm going to give you one little tip that's going to help you kind of break out of that. So let's get into it. All right. So the first trap is what I call the good enough syndrome. You've climbed a long way at this point, right? Like you've climbed further than most people, maybe more people in your family or friends, right? And you can still see how much higher up the mountain goes, but somewhere along the way, you start questioning, like, why? What's the point? And the thing is, like, only people who've achieved enough to see the diminishing returns of like chasing more for the sake of more start to ask that question. Like you've done enough and you're like, what's the point of doing more? But there's a difference between questioning the game and then just quitting the game entirely. And what happens is like your comfort zone, again, like it exceeded your ambition, your desire, or at least the motivations that you had when that got you into the game, right? Like when you start, you have all these extrinsic motivators. I want to get that car, that house. I want to have the financial success, all those things that are moving you forward. And then you get to this point where you have stuff to lose, right? And once you have something to lose, you start protecting it. You start playing defense rather than playing offense. And the thing that got you here, it doesn't work anymore to get you to get you any further. And the people that are either the most burnt out as founders or long-term just generally the least happy are the ones that never figured out how to transition the fuel source from that extrinsic, maybe dark energy, a chip on your shoulder, proving people wrong, to this more intrinsic, clean energy that says, I'm climbing this thing because I love climbing, not to get to the top, but just because I love climbing. Like you were made to climb as a human, you were made to climb. And I think as weird as it sounds, like humans were made to work. And if you're not working, that's when like bad things start to happen psychologically, existentially. It's when I see people, the founders that have drifted into depression. That's what led them there. All right. So the second trap is what I call the golden handcuffs problem. And this is it's tied directly to what I was just talking about before. It's a sneaky one because it disguises itself as wisdom. It works like this. At some point, you have that thing to lose. You have a business with real revenue, you have reputation, you have a lifestyle, you have a team that depends on you, right? And suddenly the calculus on the risk reward scenario changes completely. So like early in your career, you're swinging for the fences because you got nothing to lose, right? You have nothing to protect. The downside of failure is just basically you lost some time. The downside is real, but I mean, the upside is proportionally so much larger by just going for the swing. But as soon as you get to a certain part on the mountain, But as soon as you get to a certain part on the mountain, the relative costs, the downside of swinging for the fences starts to become pretty significant, right? Like now you actually have assets, you have people relying on you, you have family. And so the safe bet here for people is that they just stop swinging. Like you start to play not to lose rather than playing to win. Like it's a fundamentally different strategy to the game. And there's a second layer to this though, which is like maybe the more important layer, which is we fall into this need to protect our identity. Like you're known maybe as being successful, as being smart, as someone who has it all figured out, which means that attempting something new, something that might fail publicly, it's not just a financial risk, it's a reputational one, right? I actually felt this quite significantly last year. Like I had spent years building this reputation as someone who's built successful businesses. And one of my businesses failed. And so suddenly I had like this very visible failure. And it was a little bit paralyzing at times to be like, okay, well, who am I now? How do I continue to climb from here? Maybe I should just go back down the mountain entirely and forget the plateau. I'm just going to go back to the parking lot. But here's the thing is like in life, risk and reward, they're not just like correlated, they are causally linked, which means like the more risk you take, the more potential upside you have. So if there is no potential upside, it means that there's probably no risk associated with it either. Naval talked about this in the terms of like when he talks about reputational risk, is like the people who build in public, who put their name on the line and like tell their story and share content about what they're doing. Like they're taking the ultimate risk, but they also then get to garner the ultimate rewards that are associated with that. And so just be aware that as you're climbing up that mountain of life or the mountain of your business, if you're finding yourself at that plateau, you have to ask yourself, what is it that I'm trying to protect here? Like, is it the financials? Is it the family? Is it the business? Or is it just like the identity that you've attached to the thing? Like the idea of losing and starting over again is just so scary and daunting that you just give up on the climb entirely. Okay, so the third trap that we fall into that gets us into all these plateaus is maybe the most insidious of them all, actually, is that like smart people are really good pattern matchers, right? We run experiments, we find what works, and then we systematize it, and that can be a superpower. In a stable environment, the person who can identify the winning patterns and then execute consistently over and over and over, they're going to win. But the problem is we don't live in a stable environment. Like the world is in a state of constant and accelerating change, which means that the pattern that won last year, it might be the losing pattern this year. And you don't know it because the lag between cause and effect in the game of business, it's long enough that it can fool you. And I've watched this happen like multiple times in my own businesses and the businesses of founders that I coach, is that they find a model that works and then the market kind of shifts and kind of changes slowly at first. And then all of a sudden it changes drastically. And the thing that got them here doesn't work anymore. So if you're stuck somewhere on that mountainside as you're building your business, you're at that plateau and you can't quite figure it out why that is, it could be that you are continually executing a bad pattern, one that worked in the past, like what got you here isn't going to keep you going anymore. And you have to be curious enough, humble enough to like ask the question, like, what does still work? What needs to change? Like, is the map that I'm using, does it still actually match the territory? And if it doesn't, you need to throw out the playbook, the one that you worked so hard to build, and go build a new one. And that can be very daunting, especially if you've achieved like a certain level of success. You're like, why would I want to start over and throw everything out? But it's like, again, the point of climbing the mountain isn't to get to the top. The point of climbing the mountain is that you were made to climb mountains. And if you stop climbing, that's when you stop growing. And that's when life starts to get pretty dark. All right. So the fourth little trap that we fall into is that we work on the wrong things. At some point, you probably started working on all the wrong things, not because like it was a bad decision per se, but because you made good decisions for a version of your business that no longer exists. And the people who plateau the longest are almost always the ones who they tied their identity to what they've done rather than who they are, what they've achieved rather than intrinsically who they are. If your identity is built as the person who built X, who's like a really good coder, really good writer, really good programmer, whatever, then building something new means threatening that identity, like shifting your skill set to something different threatens that identity. And so you keep doing these things, these skills that you developed in the past because they worked, but that's not enough to keep you moving forward anymore. And so you stall out. So here's a reframe that's helped me quite a lot when it comes to like getting my ass moving again off of that plateau is instead of tying your identity to your outputs, tie it to your capacity. Like, you're not the person that built a specific thing. You're a person who's capable of learning, who's capable of adapting, capable of building again. And that's a completely different foundation to start from. It's the only one that's going to hold up when inevitably the ground shifts underneath of you and you need to start moving forward again. So here's the through line, if you haven't noticed, across all four of these, is that the plateau isn't really a destination problem. It's an identity problem. Like, the good enough syndrome happens when your identity is tied to what you've accumulated. The golden handcuffs is an identity issue that's tied to what you're trying to protect. Like, the way it's always been happens when your identity is tied to a method, and working on the wrong things, it happens when your identity is tied to a past version of yourself. Every single one of these traps has the same root cause. It is a static identity in a dynamic world. The fix isn't necessarily a new strategy or a new system or a new set of habits. The fix is this: stop defining yourself by what you've built and start defining yourself by your willingness to build again, to do it differently, from zero, every single time. Not because you lost everything because you had to, but because that's the only version of the game at the end of the day that's really worth playing, right? So if you enjoyed this at all, share it with somebody that you know who's maybe quietly plateaued. You've noticed they're not moving forward anymore, and you're starting to wonder, like, how long are they going to sit there on their little plateau on their base camp? Sometimes the most valuable thing that you can do to give someone else is just the language for a feeling that's kept them trapped. And once they can have that language, once they can identify it, often that can be enough just to get them moving again. So maybe this is what you needed. If it is, let me know down in the comments, guys. I'll see you in the next video.